lot of you guys got really pressed by some of my takes in the best and worst Legends video for this season, so I figured I'd dive a little bit deeper into the reasons behind some of the rankings, but in this video, just focus on the best and worst ultimates in Season 19. Let's begin. Starting off with D tier. First up is Crypto. Now, the biggest problems with his ultimate is, well, it's difficult to use. Now, I don't mean like it's hard to actually do it, it's just hard to have it be completely a success where it significantly helps you win that fight. And here's why. You want to try to EMP without hitting yourself, and realistically, your teammates as well. This means that the ultimate has to be pretty close so that you can play off of the 50 damage that the EMP does, but not so close that you could easily screw up your squad's attempt at just normally fighting that enemy team. Having a means of mobility can help here as you can combine these, but now we're talking about multiple legends and coordinating this even further. I feel like this makes an EMP way too complicated. But lastly, the drone is pretty dang easy to counter. All it takes is 50 damage to destroy, and once it's destroyed, that cooldown on getting the drone back is ridiculously long. This takes away any element of surprise, especially if you're going to wait around for that drone to come back. They either need to make it so that Crypto doesn't take damage to this ability, or they could also make it so that he doesn't stun his teammates, so at the very least, they could play up ahead of Crypto and be more effective at playing off of that EMP damage and effect. Next in D tier is Ashe's Phase Tear. Now, there's a couple big problems with this ability. First is the lack of consistency when it comes to the portal connecting to wherever you're trying to actually get it to. This feels like the ability is more contingent on the game making the correct read of where you're trying to go and less in the hands of the player using it in a skillful manner. Another big problem with this ability is the lack of range on it. Now, I'm not sure why Apex is hesitant to buff it so that it can go further, but when you combine both of these problems together, you get a Legends ability that is pretty underwhelming. Now, a lot of Ashe mains have their pitchforks out, so yes, of course, you can have success with this at times, but in order to do so, you must make a split-second decision when you have an edge to then close the gap, and if you don't, or you screw this up slightly, you're probably getting knocked as soon as you come through the portal, as it's pretty easy to predict where you're coming from and where you're going to, and you're then at a point of no return. Ashe needs a buff. Third in D tier is Watson's Gen. Now, overall, this ability isn't great. However, yes, in niche moments where a Watson squad is effectively holding an area, this ability can become more like B tier. Now, you may be wondering why I have this take. Well, since this game is a battle royale where you're often going to be moving, you're not always going to be in a great spot to hold and block any incoming ordinances, or just hold an area where the gen can't get shot out, even as it passively shields you up. Not to mention, this ability needs to be preemptive. Otherwise, the ordinances can just flat out destroy it, or you'll just end up taking damage to whatever's being thrown at you if you try being too reactive with it. We also just got a legend Conduit whose tactical serves way better when it comes to recharging teammates' shields than Watson's ultimate does. So at this time, I think her ultimate kind of feels outdated for the current state of the game. Alright, now moving up the list into C tier. Starting it off is Lifeline. Now, this ability is situational at best, which a lot of people are going to think, yeah, duh. But what I'm actually saying is the situations where this ultimate is useful feel far outnumbered by the times it feels like you don't really need what's in this ultimate. Sure, you have no good armor. Yeah, this ability will help you. Maybe it'll give you a couple shield batteries or a weapon attachment, but that doesn't feel that impactful in a game mode like pubs where players play more aggressive, they're able to acquire loot quicker, it doesn't feel like you're lacking on so much stuff. Shift the game mode to ranked, and you might be playing more passive because you're trying to look for a more strategic approach to the match. Yes, this ability could then become more valuable. And I will say, over the course of the many seasons that Apex has been out, her ultimate is the best it's ever been. However, right now, when you compare her to a legend like Loba, it feels like you're able to get more and you're able to get stuff more often from a legend like Loba. If you have a very passive playstyle, you may value this ultimate more. However, if you're very aggressive, you might not think this ult is that good. Oh, real quick, a lot of people misconstrue this and think that because I start C tier with a specific legend that I think that they're the best in that tier. That's not how I do these tier lists. When I start a tier, they're all just treated equal within that tier. Moving down the list to Fuse. Now, if you're good with this ability, in certain moments, it can be better than C tier. But given the fact that the geography of the map is a huge variable here when it comes down to how effective the motherload can be, I gotta put it in C tier. You can't really use it indoors too well because it will end up screwing up Fuse or maybe even his team teammates because you're not going to be able to see over the flames, and it's not going to launch in that wider circle. It'll be more condensed. If you're outdoors and you launch this thing, well, enemies can walk out of it really quickly when they see that it's coming down, they hear it, and they only end up taking 5 damage. This has always been my biggest problem with it, because you could do everything to hit a successful fusel, and then boom, the enemy just counters it by stepping over the fire and takes 5 damage. Now, if they end up waiting too long and then walk through the fire, they take 35 damage and then a tick for 8, and then it goes on for a little bit. But a lot of people just get out of his ultimate before that ever happens. I find this ability to be decent when you're kind of third partying from a distance and both those teams are ultimately distracted with one another, so the mother load just complicates and confuses the fight, and then you can move up and play off of whatever damage was done. You also can combine a lot of other abilities with this fusel, making it more powerful, but that also requires coordination, and that's not always possible, especially if you're a solo queue player. Next is Mad Maggie. Now, well, if you've listened to any of my videos before, you know I've got a lot of problems with the Mad Maggie Wrecking Ball. This ability is consistently inconsistent when it comes to what it's actually going to do. Sometimes it'll come back and stun Maggie or stun her teammates. Other times it will just go in an odd direction, or will have a strange interaction with a piece of the map and it gets bugged out. Yeah, there can be times where you roll this ball through a door and into a building and it hits a couple enemies, they get stunned, and hopefully you can play off of some of that. But if you're unable to because the ability decided to do something weird, it probably leaves you feeling a bit underwhelmed with this ultimate. You could also use it as a means to rotate or escape if you'd like, because you get that speed boost, but that is also pretty underwhelming when you compare to other mobility abilities, or even something like an evac tower or a trident. I've been calling and calling for this ability to get addressed because it really needs to be tweaked, or at the very least have some bugs worked on it, but that hasn't happened, so I gotta leave it in C tier for now. All right, next up is Vantage's ultimate. Now, this was buffed at the beginning of the season. It now has 6 bullets instead of 5, but I honestly feel like this ability doesn't currently fit well in the game of Apex. This ability is the only ultimate that you're able to use some of before it's at 100%, and while I don't think that's the problem, it feels a bit awkward when you say have 2 bullets but only hit 1, or maybe you even hit both of them but it didn't get you a knock, and then you don't have any more bullets. It just doesn't feel like an ultimate in the way other abilities do. Now, I also think the outplay and readability on this sniper is far too high. Once a shot rings out, or even if you see that laser beam ahead of time, you're probably gonna flat out avoid that line of sight. This makes her ult super easy to counter and removes most of the power from it. Now, I'm not sitting here saying that the sniper is trash, because it isn't, and you can still 2-tap people with it, but I will say, unless you get a naive player who feels like challenging this, or you're able to use it like Fuse's ult and third party with it while those two teams are distracted with one another, it doesn't feel like that strong of an ability. All right, next is Octane's jump pad. Now, this ability is certainly fun to use, and if you're 3-man taking it, looking to be aggressive against a squad, it can certainly work out. But this is a case of an ability that's not as good as it used to be. All right, the audio indication that comes with it makes it very easy to read what's happening. You're no longer getting silently jump padded on like you were when this thing was meta. But also, players who are floating through the air off an Octane pad don't have accuracy, so the player who is looking at the players floating in the air can probably get some damage off before you ever land, and that's why strength in numbers here really makes this ability that much better. Don't get me wrong though, this is still a very fun ability to use in the game. It's just not that strong. All right, wrapping up C tier is Valkyrie's Skyward Dive. Now, I touched on this in my previous video, but this ability is not nearly as good as it once was, okay? With the addition of evac towers, it's made using Valkyrie's ultimate not as good. The best part about using a Valk ult is the fact that her passive allows for that scan, so you can see where enemies are that you may not be able to see when you're not using Valk and just taking an evac tower. Valk's ult is pretty easy to read as well, because they made it so you can't turn when you're flying up. It's got a slower takeoff. Players can get beamed or shot off of it if they're trying to Valk ult in a vulnerable spot, or in a spot that maybe isn't great but they need to go. You know, it has its use cases from time to time, but it's certainly not nearly as good as it once was, so I'm leaving it in C tier for now. Valk feels like she's fallen from the meta completely. I still think she can be viable, but this ultimate isn't very good right now. Moving on to B tier. First up is Caustic. Caustic ulting an enemy team can be used for a couple different purposes, and I really think that this ability is still a decent one. You can obviously use it for area denial, like if you need to revive a teammate or something like that, but you can use it to be aggressive and breach an area with it as well. If the enemies are foolish enough to stick around in it, then it should result in some free kills. The downside here though is that it's not always that scary to go up against. So some players will still fight you in it, especially if they know you're low before you threw the ult. And this ability only tends to do well in close quarter combat, which can also affect affect its efficiency. So it's definitely a situational ability. When you get in the right moment at the right time, I think it really shines. Moving down to Bloodhound. Now, Bloodhound's ult is still good. You get the speed boost, enemies are highlighted in red, maybe a scan or two to go along with it. I mean, sure, it might not be as good as it once was because you don't get as many scans, but this thing is still fun to use and it has its real use cases, especially for fighting. This ultimate can also get recharged fairly quickly due to the update Bloodhound received a few seasons ago, where scanning or interacting with the White Raven reduces the ultimate cooldown by 25%. This is huge for getting their ultimate back rather quickly. Next is Mirage. Now, Mirage's ult is on a 60-second cooldown, and this is something that can cause a lot of chaos. It's not always going to work out in your favor, but the fact that you can get it so quickly and that Apex's audio can be inconsistent at times, well, Mirage really benefits using his ultimate here. The footstep audio will be very confusing, especially if the enemy player doesn't see the ultimate activate and if Mirage uses the right moves. He could easily get the draw on an enemy while they're still trying to decipher which one is the real Mirage. Now, this also complements his special revives, but ultimately, if you learn to use this well, it should be a free 1v1. Next up is Seer, and there's probably a really strong case to put Seer's ultimate down in C tier, and I thought hard about it, but I still think this thing is too good, particularly in building fights. You're not able to throw this as far, it doesn't give you as much information these days, but when you get in a building and it's rather confusing because you can't tell exactly where everyone's at or how many players there are, using it in a building, hiding it behind some piece of cover allows for it to probably not get shot out, and then you're able to get some live time information on the enemy team and figure out which one you want to pick off and isolate. This ability is great for fighting indoors. Next up in B tier is Newcastle, and in my last video I mentioned that if I wasn't ever told about these Newcastle buffs, I would have never even known they were a thing this season, because come to find out, they really weren't. Whether it's a bug or the buffs just never launched into the live game, I'm not really sure, but I know at the time of making this video, the buffs haven't come through. With that said, assuming the buffs do come, I think his wall is still a pretty good ability for fighting and for resetting. It's a little tough at times when the wall doesn't want to connect to where you're trying to get it to, but it obviously will work best when you're trying to attach it to a teammate. This is obviously a really good tool at resetting the fight because once you launch to the teammate, you could quickly get a revive behind the wall, but you can also set it up within a fight to create some cover on the fly, and then hopefully that plays into you guys winning that fight. It's a pretty solid ability overall, and I hope the buffs come. Next up is Loba's Black Market. Now, Loba's ultimate isn't always going to be something that's game-changing per se, but it's definitely extremely useful, particularly in those matches where you can't seem to find the loot you want or need. Ammo, heals, survival items, attachment upgrades, and not just for you, but for your whole squad, is a very strong thing to have in Apex. This ability also has a very short cooldown, so it will apply at many different times during the match. For all you Lobas out there, make sure you collapse the Black Market, and for the love of God, do not throw it down when you're in the middle of a fight, because most of the time your random teammates will go and loot it, get distracted, and that enemy team will just jump you. So be smart about the timing and where you want to place this ult. Of course, if you're playing with a pre-made squad, it might be better to use it within the fight if you guys are all on the same page, but with randoms, you got to be really careful about this part. All right, second to last in B tier is Gibraltar's defensive bombardment. Now, Gibby's ult feels rather niche these days, but the fact that they reduced the cooldown on it last season makes me feel like it's in a good spot. Now, sure, it won't be helpful in every fight, but if you get to end game or if you want to move a team off of high ground, this ability can be a killer. So B tier for now. All right, finishing off B tier is Ballistic's Tempest. I've come to appreciate this ability more and more. I actually really enjoy using it, and one of the best parts about this ability is it will help your teammates if they're near you, but if they aren't because, well, they died and already left the game, the ultimate still has everything for Ballistic himself. Fast reloads, faster running speed, kitted weapons, all of this stuff significantly can amplify the gunplay for at least 30 seconds and can really give you an edge in the fight. The timing of this ability can be a bit tricky, but it's not too difficult if the enemy team just squares up with you. This ultimate is also only on a 2-minute cooldown, which I think is really clutch, so I'm a big fan of this. All right, now moving on to A tier. First up is Conduit and her jammers. These have proven to be a strong ability to deal with in Season 19. They can cover a large amount of area, and it takes around 200 damage to destroy just one jammer. This can make it so that enemies are far too occupied with trying to shoot them out that you may be able to find an edge while they're distracted with one of them. I'll also say, because the visual indicator on them isn't super glaring, a lot of players will wind up in the jammers without them realizing it. And this can not only let you know where that enemy is, but also help you get a free kill out of it. But one downside to this ability is how long it takes for the jammers to activate, as an enemy can bypass them pretty quickly before they've activated if they're already moving through that area. A cool little tip for this ability is if you are about to launch the ultimate and you melee at the same time, you will get 4 of the jammers placed, but you'll get 50% on your ultimate cooldown, so you've kind of used half of the ultimate. This can be helpful if you want to use the jammers indoors and only block off a smaller area, but also this is a really unique aspect where we're getting to see a legend use basically half of their ult with getting half of the cooldown back instantly. Not sure if it's a bug or if it's something they intended, but it's certainly in the game right now. Next is Bangalore's Rolling Thunder. Now, yes, this did receive a slight nerf to the stunning effects it causes, but I don't believe this to be too big of a deal. This ultimate is great at denying area, moving teams out of certain area, punishing teams in a smaller zone. I mean, it has a ton of use cases. You can use it to retreat if you're getting third-partied, on and on and on. This ability also complements Bangalore's kit as a whole, although I'm trying not to view a lot of these abilities in that light, but it's hard to ignore it on a legend like Bangalore. So overall, this is still a top tier ability in Season 19. Third in A tier is Horizon's Black Hole. And while this ability isn't as strong as it once was, it's still proven to be a very, very strong ability. If you pair this ability with throwables, particularly arc stars, it will definitely turn the fight in your favor if you use it correctly. Enemies can counter it much easier these days because they can shoot it out, and if they team fire it, that's really where this threat will be neutralized. But this ability has so many different use cases, which helps make it that good of an ability. Players can use it indoors, outdoors, up against doors, I mean, on and on and on. And of course, it pairs well with other abilities in this game. Next is Catalyst's Dark Veil. The Catwall is still a very strong ability in Season 19. It's an ability that should complement a fight or a rotation. This can create a lot of confusion and uncertainty for enemies, and it did get a slight nerf this season, and the cooldown on it was also increased last season, but overall, that hasn't made this ability obsolete or anything close to it. Still very strong, so A tier for now. Next up is Wraith's Portal. This ability is also very good. It's helpful for rotations. It's helpful to get closer to fights, but fights you may not be absolutely sure that you want to leave your positioning completely, so you can go back and forth with it, which makes it very flexible within a fight. You can use it to retreat, pull off a res, anything like that, and there's a ton of outplay that can also be attached to this ability because a lot of players will try to take it, and if that Wraith or that Wraith's teammate is smart, it can probably wind up getting a free kill out of this because the player doesn't know what they're coming into on the other side of that portal. I know there's a lot of players who don't think this ability is so good because of how long it takes to activate this thing and the readability that can come with a Wraith portal, but I think this ability is truly a skill gap ability. The better you get with it, the more outplay you can find attached to it. Next is Pathfinder's Zipline. This is a very straightforward ability, and of course it's great for your rotations and has some movement enhancements, but the fact that you can get them so often just by scanning a care package is amazing. It's not an ability that will always win you a fight or anything like that, but it allows for you to be very, very flexible throughout a match because you're often going to have the ability to not only rotate, but take high ground if that's needed, and many other helpful use cases. Lastly, in A tier is Rampart's Sheila. This is a very strong ultimate, and this thing can shred enemies who are in close or medium range of it. It's not going to work at the longer ranges because it has a pretty steep recoil and the bullet spread becomes rather unmanageable at those ranges, but if you're able to get an enemy in your line of sight for a couple seconds and you already have Sheila out, it should be a free kill. This is not an ability that you're going to want to try to challenge another player with if Sheila isn't already out, because what you're going to find is that that enemy will get the draw on you, they'll shoot first, and they'll probably kill you first. So don't be too reactive with this ability if you're in line of sight of that enemy. That's where this thing will not do well. So if you can master the timing with this ability, you will definitely find some free kills with it, and also some very funny moments to go along with that. Now into S tier, and I only have one legend here, and it's Revenant. Revenant got reworked last season, and his ultimate, it's rather silly, let's be honest. You get enhanced health, you get a boost to his tactical if you get a down, the timer continues if you get a knock. I mean, this thing is just very, very silly because it's essentially a free tool to 1v1 or even 1v2 or 1v3 an enemy squad because of this additional health. And what's even crazier with this ability is you can already get cracked or take some damage, have time to activate it, and completely recoup from the fight with just this ability. It can ultimately just win you so many fights because of this ability that it has to be S tier. And it's kind of funny how we've seen Revenant go from F tier all the way up to S tier, but here we are in Season 19. If you enjoyed this video and you want to learn all about the best and worst weapons this season, I suggest you check out this video next. Thanks for watching. Peace.